Welcome back to the Student Hub Live. Well, that was a fantastic session. I hope you're still thinking about your holiday. It's definitely important to plan one. I'm now joined by David Heley with a fabulous hat, if I may say so.
Well, I thought I'd join in.
You have joined in, indeed.
Wear a hat day. These guys encouraged me. It's all their fault.
Poor Stephen is hatless.
I know. What's going on, Stephen?
This won't do.
Have I got your hat?
There we go. We'll soon change that.
Well, I have somehow managed to be exempt, which is good. David, I wanted to talk to you about this problem some students have, OK? Some students might be doing two 30-credit modules and they might really, really love one and they might not like the other one as much. Often what these students might notice is that there are points at which they have TMAs and those can conflict. So sometimes, you know, just because of the way that we plan modules at the Open University, they might have a lot of stuff on at once, and sometimes they'll really love one module and they might not like the other one quite so much, but they've got two deadlines. And this can present a problem for them because of what they do about it. But also I know that some students sort of have a very high emotional attachment to specific modules. So I wanted to ask you about how they negotiate this relationship between content that they either really love and want to spend more time than maybe they should on, irrespective of whether they're doing two in tandem, and what to do when maybe they've got to do a module that they don't quite like as much.
Well, I think it's a really tricky situation because a student has obviously at some point in the few months before this situation has chosen to do these modules, so there must be really good reasons why they've chosen to do them. Another way of looking at this, I would think, I would suggest, is that maybe you should try and embrace and be passionate about the one that actually, formally, you're not passionate about.
OK.
And I would really try and do that. I actually, which is a slight contradiction to what I'm going to say next, because the trouble when you're studying a module that you're passionate about, and you know, say it was a theatre course about the theatre and you go to the theatre all the time, or it was a physics course and you're really good at physics and you want to be a physics teacher or whatever. The problem is that you can miss out. You don't see the wood for the trees, And I think it's probably better to try and be someone that kind of is going to embrace a course in terms of the challenges it presents to you, and really not worry too much that you know, it's difficult. I would also encourage people not to worry about failing. I don't mean failing the whole course, but actually finding it difficult. So I guess in a long way round, I'm coming back to saying that, you know, you're studying a course, you're not really enjoying it. Maybe you're not getting very good TMA scores. Actually, I don't think that matters too much. I think you try and go back to the original decision why you chose to do it, and try and embrace that one. The one that's causing difficulties.
What if the decision is, I want this particular qualification, therefore I have to do this?
Yeah, OK. So therefore, I would really try and find something in the course that really connects to you. Or even this, even if you can't find it on the surface, you know, straight away, just have a mindset which says, I'm going to love this course. I'm going to find things about the course. What we said this morning about finding connections and really really trying to find a place in your heart for it as well as your head. I'll give you an example. When I was
just before we do, David, we're loving your hat. Just want to adjust your microphone very quickly. Okay. So I just want to take a quick trip to Frank and Stephen while we do that. Stephen, you've got a different hat on.
Oh yes, I felt a bit left out. So here I am. But David, you know, he's trumped us all with the hat front. So. But there's a few things that are currently being discussed in the minute. What we're keen to find out is you know, whether or not students are studying more than one module, and in particular how they're finding that at the moment. So if that's something that anybody, you know, would like to share, it would be good to get some feedback on that, especially because that's something that we in the SST, the student support team, we deal with that quite a lot, students who come in and are studying more than one module. So it's always good to find out. So if anyone is keen to add some input on that, that would be really useful.
Because one of the things that Sally and Katie were saying earlier is that one of the reasons that people often do fail, if they do, is because they've made the wrong module choice. But sometimes, like we were saying before, you know, you do have this qualification pathway that if you want to go and have a psychology degree, you need to do X, Y and Z, and that's all there is to it. Otherwise, your option is to do an open degree. So again, it's this whole balance thing. But go on with what you were saying before.
Well, I was just going to give an example from the 70s, which is prehistoric, right? compared to the OU now. However, back then you had to do 2 foundation courses. I'm an arts person. I've been teaching the arts, for over 20 years for the OU and longer elsewhere. And yet I had to do another. So I chose the social science one.
Yeah.
And I was really dreading it. And I almost saw it as a year off.
Yeah.
Because I'd done a couple of arts ones. Anyway, I went to the summer school. First 2 days, wasn't enjoying it. And we had to do this day experiment where we had to look at all this data about population, about buildings, about demographic, all this information that social scientists look at. And we had to, from the information, we had to predict what the area in Nottingham was like. And then the next day, we all went on a bus tour around Nottingham, and without looking out the window, you had to, or rather, they'd go to your area and you'd read out the stuff. Now, somewhere along the line, we'd made a miscalculation because I wasn't particularly interested. There were a few people there who weren't. And we were reading out all this stuff about there's 10 people to a room, that it's a really poor, socially deprived area. All the other students were looking out the window, and it's the richest area in Nottingham. And after that, it really taught me a lesson about, even though I wasn't enjoying it, I'd made quite a serious mistake. And no one cared, it was fun.
Yeah.
And since then, I remember later on in my degree, I did a course in moral philosophy. I think it was 30 points just to finish my degree. I'm not a moral philosopher. I went in to the course, the whole thing, thinking I'm really going to enjoy this. I know nothing about it. Absolutely loved it. And I didn't do that well. I got a pass, whatever. But I remember that some of those debates and some of those issues in that course, it's not my subject, still stay with me. And it was a wonderful experience. I'm not better than anyone else, and I'm not trying to preach to people, but I think if you're in that situation and you can't defer, say, or change the module, you want to stick with it, do the opposite, embrace it. See if you can find something in it that really grabs you and go with that.
Now, you're so enthusiastic and passionate, and I love your stories. I can imagine if you were my tutor, I'd say, not so interested in this, and you just absolutely inspire me. You were talking about the importance of working with your tutor earlier and about connecting in that sort of way. Is that something students might do, just to say, look, I'm not really that keen on this, I'm only doing it because of this. Yeah. And actually, because the tutor's probably really enthusiastic about the subject, they might be in a really good position to say, OK, but this is why it might be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I had, I used to teach a 3rd level literature course, and a lot of people on that course were not really into literature. They just wanted to finish with a 60 credit 3rd level course. I remember this one guy, for the first few tutorials, he was just sitting there like that while I was, I tried to get people discussing, and he was just like this. And after about the 4th tutorial, I said something deliberately provocative to get everyone to, that Thomas Hardy's poems are rubbish, kind of thing. And he went, "What are you talking about? That's so, And suddenly, I found this, purely by chance, I'd found something that he did feel quite passionate about. Not only did he finish the course and do really well, I remember he wrote a really good end-of-module assessment. It was terrific. He invited me to his graduation. Wow. And afterwards he said, if it wasn't for you, I would have failed this course because I was hating every minute of it. All my colleagues do this as well. I'm hoping they will. We've got to make the subject interesting for the students, if we can. So, yes, if you're not finding it interesting, if you're feeling really demoralised about it, first step, maybe tell your tutor and see if, in that student-tutor relationship, something can happen to get the juices flowing again.
So how might students do that then? Do you expect them to send you an email going, not really sure about this?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Phone the tutor. Just have a conversation about it. I'm finding it really tough. Students know, and if you're new, you will know that you can ask for extensions on cut-off dates. The problem with that is you just fall behind and it goes into a spiral. But you have that option. I would encourage students to use that option, when they have to. But it's more about the tutor knowing, and you never know, they might be able to cut their cloth and give you a bit of extra time, occasionally, and might find something in what you say to them that they might say, you know what, actually that's really interesting, because if you read this essay by so-and-so, that might help you make a connection and might keep you going. So yeah.
I want to talk about something that Alice is saying, because she's done business modules before and she didn't really like them, and she's got a bit of a business module aspect coming up in her module, and she's not sure whether or not she should just push through it or do something a bit different. But I'm just sort of thinking about that comment that Alice has made and thinking, actually, sometimes it's our preconception. I know with Sally and Katie, who were here before, often the preconception of what maths is very different to what you end up doing in a maths module, for example. So sometimes it's those mental barriers and blocks that can be more of a problem than actually what is there. Because business, as we know, for example, can be done so differently depending on where it is and in what context, etc. So these terms that we've got, these very rigid discipline ideas, aren't necessarily useful labels.
Well, I'm a trainer as well as a teacher, so I help train the tutors. And I remember a few years ago, I went on a course about training the trainers. And the 3 people who were running the course, it was residential. You know, again, it seems like a different age now. We were away for 3 or 4 days.
The olden days, I know.
But I saw the biographies of all these 3 people running it, and they were all from business. You know, I'm going, I'm an artist, I'm an actor, they were unbelievably brilliant, these three people. They were the most creative people I've worked with for years. There's something about business and management that I don't know what it is, but actually in studying it and teaching it can be really creative. What they did, they took the situation that we expected it to be like, and they turned it inside out and really opened it up. It was amazing. So talk to your tutor, look at it. Don't ever separate who you are from the course material. Try and mould yourself and connect yourself to it. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a kind of bee in your bonnet to write an essay or an end of course module or an important project, you want to write it up in a particular way that you think is not conventional, my first thing would be do it or start preparing it. You might want to just run it past your tutor just to make sure it fits certain protocols, but I would embrace it, I would connect to it, and I would do it your way. Because, you know, it's not knowledge that this is all about, Karen, and you know this more than anyone. It's wisdom. And however much, you know, the hours and days you put into studying, it's not so you know all these facts. I don't think so. I think it's about being, for you, a better person, transforming into the person you want to be. And if that means getting that job that you want at the end or that career, then that's great too. Of course it is. But I think everything that we can study as a student, one of my notes here was study, in quotes, most of the time if you're doing 2 modules. So when you're out, even with your kids or with your family and so on, and you're just going to go and see the latest James Bond film or just go shopping, make connections. You could actually, a lot of students say they become quite boring in their family because they turn everything into a kind of academic thing. But for me, as a student, these are such important years that that's what you should be doing. Every second of the 6 years or 5 years you're studying, you should be a student and you should be making connections. I don't mean, by the way, putting pressure on yourself. I mean just embracing the world for what it is and seeing it. Doesn't matter what you're studying, the arts, science, maths, just see the world through what you're studying and make a note of how you are I wish I'd done this. I'd wish in my first year as a student back in 1973, I'd written down how I felt, where I was in my life, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of it, wrote it down again. Because you know what? Thanks to all the tutors and all the fellow students, I went on this amazing journey. And I think every student can do that.
Alice says that's the best advice she's ever had. Thank you.
Excellent.
So what I want to ask you then is how you go about doing this. And if you've been on these training courses and you're training people, I'm thinking, oh, there must be some techniques here, because, you know, I can listen to you and I can think, yes, I'm going to be enthusiastic about that. But then if I go and look up zero-sum game, for example, I'm going to think, OK, a bit boring. Sometimes I encourage students to think, OK, we can give you this theory that may look a little bit dry, but go outside and think, OK, like you say, so what? What does this mean and how might I apply it? How might I remember what I've learned and think, does this make sense out on my street?
OK, this is very tricky because I'm speaking kind of metaphorically here, but I do some creative exercise with tutors, encouraging them to do this kind of thing in the classroom and even online. But when you asked me to do this particular session, I thought, can this be transferred for students looking at the material so they can do it themselves? Imagine a room, one wall over there, one wall over there, and I say to tutors, you can do this with your students. Take a very controversial subject, in history, say. Take something like Pearl Harbor, right? Not Pearl Harbor, the terrible bombings in Japan, Hiroshima. And if you had some history students or social science students and said, all those people over there who feel that it was a terrible and it shouldn't have happened, most people go over there. 2 or 3 brave people might go over there and say it was necessary, yeah? What most students want to do is not go to those 2 extremes, but they want to stand on a line. So some people think, well, it was awful, but maybe it needed to be done. Some people think, well, it wasn't as bad as all that because actually it saved millions of American lives. And what I'm saying to a student, if you're studying something like the end of the Second World War and both the political and moral implications of those bombs, which is awful, don't get me wrong, test yourself, don't just read the material, think the opposite as well. Think, especially with social media and the internet now, you can find articles and through really good library websites which actually give the opposite argument to what you feel and what you believe. And in this way, you can begin to nuance your view of a particular subject. And when I do this with tutors, I get phone calls sometimes from tutors saying they've tried it out in the classroom. And the most incredible thing is they're all standing in a line where they believe, whatever the issue is, could be Brexit, could be whatever, Donald Trump's presidency, whatever. And people start talking and then people change position. That change is the student journey. So you should be expecting to change and to develop your views, whether it's deeper views and deeper understanding of a particular subject. Test yourself, challenge yourself. You may not want to do it, you might be fed up with doing it, but if you really embrace it, by the end of it, you might think, oh my God, it's the best module I've ever done, and I didn't even want to do it.
Well, this is what Libby says, actually. Libby's one of my students, and so she'll be very familiar with groupthink, but she's doing a module that she didn't think she'd enjoy so much, and she's really, really enjoying it, which I think is amazing. One of the things that I think is really evident about what you're saying is that I imagine that you probably don't remember what you did when you didn't write your journal in 1973. Yeah. And the content that sort of seems so relevant, like right now. Everyone's sort of, what does this mean? How might I apply it? And it seems like what you're saying is actually, it's the thinking, it's these processes, is this what you are becoming that actually shifts. And that's the value of the education. Not that you remember who said this and who said that. And we sometimes, I think I was looking for some notes the other day and I eventually found them and they weren't quite as good as I remembered they were at the time. But I remember those notes being associated with some big idea that I'd suddenly just got. And I think sometimes, it is one of those things whereby it's about maybe looking in those unexpected places, and maybe the modules that you don't think you're like are the perfect places to start finding those ideas.
You know what? I think that's absolutely wonderful. I wish now, part of me wishes, that I'd done astronomy as a student. I can't go back and do it now, I'm just kind of too long in the tooth. But,
Never too late.
Never too... Well, maybe I should do that. But
you can do the Moonsmeet. We've been talking about that.
But I just... my only regret of 6 years as a student in the 70s, and then I've done postgraduate stuff, is I've always done stuff that I felt passionate about, and I got more passionate. If I could do it again, I wonder whether, especially as I'm saying all this, whether I actually should do a chemistry degree or an astronomy degree or whatever, and really test myself, and really transform myself, and really push myself. So, I'm not advocating that kind of extreme, but if it's slightly some bumps in the road for a module you've chosen or you're under pressure, I go back to my very first sentence. Embrace it, love it. Actually, you might find it's the best thing you've ever done.
And so many of our students doing open degrees get that sort of range of flexibility and choices. In fact, we're having a debate, which I think will turn to quite a heated discussion this evening, and where we're looking at, whether an open qualification is better than a named qualification for students. So again, taking various people who are, up for that idea. But again, I think that will show up some interesting things because, people are approaching things from different disciplines. And it's when you have those different disciplines with those different concerns, different sort of data, different stuff going on, that you really do do see things from a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I used to be a tutor that went into prisons because a lot of people in secure environments study with the Open University, and I was able to go in, you know, and have tutorials. And there's this one guy, and I remember when I asked him why is he doing it, he said in order not to be locked up 23 hours a day. That was his only interest in doing it. He had no interest. We were studying Shakespeare and poetry and all that. And I started with him. The poem I asked him to read wasn't on the course at all. And it was the poem that someone back in 1973, when I first started as a student, had shown us. And it was by Roger McGough. I recommend, doesn't matter what you're studying out there, folks, read this poem. It's called At Lunchtime, A Story of Love. And I got the guy to read it. And, you know, he looked at me as if I was crazy. Then we read it together. And at the end of the poem, basically the poem's set on a bus, and at lunchtime a nuclear bomb's going to go off. I'm fascinated with nuclear weapons today for some reason. Nuclear bomb's going to go off, yeah. And so this guy stands up and says, well, look, if we're all going to die at lunchtime, why don't we all just make love to each other? It's really funny, you know, it's set in the 60s. So they do that. And then the second half of the poem starts on the way home that night. In other words, the bomb hadn't gone off. Everyone's really embarrassed, see? But he then stands up and says, well, look, I don't care if it didn't end at lunchtime. I really enjoyed it this morning, you know. It's done as a poem, much better than this. Why don't we all make love? So they all do it again. And then there's these last few lines are, and so they did. In every room, in every house, in every street, in every part of the city, in every country, in every continent, in every part of the world, people made love one to another. But the world hadn't ended, but in a way, it has. Yeah, and the poem. And this guy was like this, you know, and he went, that's a love bomb that's happened there, a love bomb. And it's gone, you know, like the waves of smoke after these terrible films of these. He said it's a love bomb. It's started in the room, then it's gone to the street, it's gone to the house. 7 years later, I had a letter from this guy, graduated. He was still inside, but thanking me and. Do you know what I mean?
No, that's amazing. Alice says she could listen to you forever. We all could, but we have to draw the session to a close. I'm afraid.
Do I have to give the hat back?
Yeah. Oh dear. David, thank you so much for coming out. A fascinating session as always. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know you've enjoyed that at home. We are going to be back with Katie and Sally again to talk about study intensity, so join us for that session. We're also going to talk a little bit later about the National Student Survey, so if you've had an email asking you to fill that in, we really, really want you to feed that in. We don't mind what you say, but it's really, really important that you give the Open University your feedback as a student. But joining me in the next session, after this short video, where we're going to look at some visualisations of maths, and then we'll be back for more. See you soon.